Number 1. Bleeding in leeches, the draining disaster. You know how some ancient medical practices sound less like healing and more like torture, and somehow people just kept doing them. That was the deeply misguided, yet incredibly popular cure of bleeding in leeches for the Black Death, based on the ancient Greek theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The prevailing belief was that disease was caused by an imbalance, often an excess of blood. So, naturally, the solution was to get rid of some of that pesky blood. Imagine lying on a rickety bed, racked with fever and covered in buboes, those horrifying, swollen lymph nodes characteristic of the plague, while a physician makes incisions in your veins or applies wriggling, blood-sucking leeches to your already inflamed skin. The idea was to balance the humors by draining out the bad blood, which was supposedly responsible for carrying the disease. Imagine feeling like you're dying, and your doctor's best idea is to make you more actively bleed. Did it work? Spoiler alert, absolutely not. Bleeding a patient, especially one already weakened by severe infection, only made them weaker, more susceptible to secondary infections, and exacerbated their existing symptoms. It literally drained their energy, their immune response, and any remaining hope. The leeches, while perhaps less aggressively harmful, still contributed nothing to actual recovery. This practice, common for centuries, was a testament to the limited understanding of disease transmission at the time. Physicians were desperate, and this was one of the few active interventions they knew, however futile or harmful. The irony, of course, is that the plague was caused by a bacterium, Yersinia pestis, spread by fleas on rats, not by an excess of blood. Bleeding in leeches proved that sometimes. The deadliest cures are those that actively accelerate your demise while being administered with the best, albeit entirely incorrect, intentions. Basically, it was ancient medical cosplay where the costume was a bleeding patient and the punchline was, well, more bleeding. Number 2, Miasma theory and aromatic pomanders, the Stinky solution. You know how some historical beliefs about disease sound completely absurd now, but made perfect sense to people at the time. That was the miasma theory, the prevailing belief during the plague epidemics that disease was caused by bad air or noxious fumes, miasmas emanating from decaying matter. The logical to them cure or prevention was to fight bad smells with good smells, leading to the widespread use of aromatic pomanders, incenses, and literal bouquets of flowers. Imagine the streets of a medieval city, filled with the stench of unburied bodies, open sewers, and general grime. People believed this bad air literally carried the disease. So, their solution was to carry around small, perforated containers filled with fragrant substances like ambergris, civet, musk, or aromatic herbs and spices. Doctors wore beaked masks filled with sweet-smelling herbs. Houses were fumigated with strong-smelling woods and resins. Imagine fighting a deadly bacterial infection with potpourri and a really good air freshener. Did it work? No, not even a little bit. The plague was bacterial, spread by fleas, not by smelly air, while good hygiene and sanitation, which would reduce bad smells, can help prevent disease. Simply masking the smell or trying to purify the air with perfumes did absolutely nothing to stop Yersinia pestis from spreading. In fact, focusing on miasmas distracted from the real vectors, rats and their fleas. The widespread use of pomanders and fragrant herbs was a desperate, if understandable, attempt to combat an invisible killer. It offered a sense of control and hope in a terrifying time, but it also highlighted the profound misunderstanding of disease at the time, proving that sometimes the deadliest cures are those that smell absolutely delightful but provide zero actual protection against the microscopic enemy. Basically, it was a scented candle for the apocalypse, and the smell of lavender really didn't stop the buboes. Number 3, applying live chickens to buboes, the fowl failure. You know how some folk remedies are just so bizarre, you have to wonder who came up with them, and how desperate they must have been. That's the truly strange cure of applying live chickens to buboes during the Black Death. This particular gem of medieval medicine involved taking a live chicken, often plucked, or half-plucked, cutting it open, and then placing its raw, exposed rear end directly onto the plague-ridden bubo, hoping it would draw out the disease. Imagine yourself in a feverish, delirious state, with a giant, painful, pus-filled bubo in your armpit or groin. Then, someone brings a terrified, possibly plucked chicken, cuts it open, and presses its feathery, squawking backside directly onto your agonizing swollen lymph node. The theory behind this was sympathetic magic, or drawing out the poison, the idea that the pure life force of the chicken, or its body heat, would somehow absorb the disease from the bubo. The chicken was then supposed to get sick and die, taking the disease with it. Did it work for the patient? Absolutely not. For the chicken, it was a very bad day. This practice was completely ineffective against the bacterial infection of the plague. It probably added stress to the patient, introduced more potential contaminants to an open wound, and was, at best, a placebo born of profound desperation. The chickens, if they died, likely succumbed to stress, infection from the bubo, or unrelated illness, not because they absorbed the plague. This remedy, often called the Vincenzo's chicken cure, or similar names, illustrates the sheer panic and lack of scientific understanding during plague epidemics. People would try anything, no matter how illogical or grotesque, in a desperate attempt to survive. Applying live chickens to buboes proved that sometimes. The deadliest cures are those born of superstition and utter desperation, leading to unnecessary suffering for both humans and bewildered poultry. Basically, it was ancient medical theater, and the chickens were tragically unwilling supporting actors in a very gross play. Number 4. Drinking mercury and arsenic. The toxic tonic. You know how some cures are just so wildly, obviously poisonous. You wonder how anyone thought they were a good idea. That's the terrifying trend of drinking mercury and arsenic during plague outbreaks, driven by desperation and a profound misunderstanding of chemistry and toxicology. Some plague doctors and alchemists prescribed these highly toxic heavy metals, believing they could somehow purge or purify the body of the disease. Imagine being told that the best way to fight a deadly fever and internal rot is to ingest a known poison. Often in a concoction that probably smelled and tasted awful, mercury was often administered as a compound, sometimes even heated into a vapor to be inhaled, or mixed with ground glass. Arsenic, another notoriously toxic substance, was also used, sometimes as a powder or mixed with other ingredients. The logic, if you could call it that, was often rooted in the alchemical belief that, like cures like, or that a powerful poison could somehow expel a powerful disease. Did it work? Spoiler, it made things infinitely worse. Mercury and arsenic poisoning caused their own horrific symptoms, including severe gastrointestinal distress, kidney failure, neurological damage, and ultimately, death. These cures either hastened the patient's demise or added another layer of excruciating suffering and organ damage on top of the already devastating plague symptoms. Imagine dying from the plague and heavy metal poisoning simultaneously. What a combo! The use of such potent poisons reflects the extreme desperation of the times, where people were willing to try anything, no matter how dangerous, to escape the clutches of the Black Death. It's a grim reminder of the fine line between medicine and murder in an era without proper scientific understanding. Drinking mercury and arsenic proved that sometimes. The deadliest cures are those that introduce a second, equally lethal, form of self-destruction. Basically, it was ancient homeopathy, but instead of diluting it, they just went straight for the poison them slightly less than the plague will approach, which was, let's be honest, not a good strategy. Number 5. Religious processions and flagellation, the penance problem. You know how some groups respond to absolute catastrophe by thinking, we must have really messed up, so let's punish ourselves to make it stop. That was the widespread and tragically ineffective cure of religious processions and flagellation during the Black Death. Convinced that the plague was divine punishment for humanity's sins, swaths of the population turned to public acts of penance, hoping to appease an angry god and make the pestilence disappear. Imagine masses of people, sometimes hundreds, even thousands, marching from town to town, chanting prayers, and publicly whipping themselves with leather scourges tipped with iron spikes. The goal was to inflict suffering upon themselves, hoping that this act of extreme repentance would prove humanity's devotion and convince God to lift the plague. These flagellants believed their suffering would absolve collective sin and stop the spread of death. Imagine a medieval spiritual boot camp where the main exercise is self-inflicted pain. Did it work? No, in fact. It likely made things worse. These large, traveling processions, moving from city to city, became super-spreader events for the very disease they were trying to stop. Unknowingly, they were carrying infected fleas and rats, along with the bacteria itself, directly into new, uninfected areas, effectively acting as mobile plague vectors. Instead of stopping the plague, they helped it spread further and faster, beyond the disease transmission. The flagellant movement also caused social unrest, sometimes turning violent against those they deemed sinners or heretics, while born of genuine fear and faith. Their actions were tragically counterproductive. Religious processions and flagellation proved that sometimes. The deadliest cures are those that, through misguided devotion, inadvertently become engines of the very destruction they seek to avert. Basically, it was a medieval flash mob, where the choreography involved self-harm, and the surprise guest star was always the Black Death. Number 6. Wearing amulets and charms, the hopeful trinket. You know how sometimes people cling to any tiny shred of hope, even if it's just a shiny rock or a piece of parchment. That was the widespread cure, or, more accurately, prevention strategy of wearing amulets and charms during the plague. In a world with no understanding of microbiology, people turned to superstition, astrology, and religious iconography, believing that certain objects possessed mystical powers to ward off disease or protect the wearer from its deadly embrace. Imagine a terrified peasant, or even a wealthy lord, meticulously selecting a small piece of amber, a specially inscribed parchment, a dried toad, or a religious medal to wear around their neck or carry in a pouch. These items were believed to have various powers, some to ward off evil spirits, others to absorb bad air, and some simply imbued with prayer for protection. Imagine going to battle against an invisible enemy, armed only with a lucky charm and a prayer. Did it work? From a scientific standpoint, absolutely not. A piece of jade or a written incantation had zero effect on the Yersinia pestis bacterium. The bubonic plague wasn't susceptible to good vibes or pretty rocks. However, from a psychological perspective, these charms likely provided an immense sense of comfort and control in a world utterly gripped by chaos and fear. They offered a mental shield, even if it was a false one, against overwhelming anxiety. The prevalence of amulets and charms highlights the deep-seated human need for agency and protection when faced with an uncontrollable threat. While they did nothing to cure or prevent the plague physically, they were a powerful testament to the human spirit's desperate search for hope and meaning in the face of unimaginable suffering. Wearing amulets and charms proved that sometimes. The deadliest cures are those that offer only psychological comfort, leaving the body utterly vulnerable to the unseen. Relentless killer. Basically, it was ancient fashion with a very serious, albeit totally ineffective, anti-plague accessory. Number 7. Herbal concoctions and treacle. The hit-or-miss hocus pocus. You know how sometimes natural remedies sound great in theory, but in practice, they're either completely useless or actively harmful, depending on who's mixing the brew. That was the very inconsistent, and often dangerous, cure of herbal concoctions and treacle during the plague. While some herbs do have medicinal properties, the medieval understanding of dosage and interaction was, shall we say, experimental, leading to a chaotic mix of genuinely helpful for symptoms, inert, or downright poisonous ingredients. Imagine a desperate plague victim being offered a thick, Dark syrup known as treacle, not the modern baking ingredient, but a complex, often bizarre, medicinal compound containing everything from snake venom and opium to powdered unicorn horn and dried lizard, or perhaps a simpler herbal brew of roots, leaves, and various animal parts, all steeped together in wine or vinegar. The belief was that these powerful, often exotic, ingredients would either purge the disease, boost the body's defenses, or counteract the poison of the plague. Did it work? It was a wild toss-up. Some ingredients, like opium, might have dulled the pain or provided a sedative effect, offering temporary relief from symptoms. Other ingredients were utterly useless, and some, like certain poisonous herbs or unpurified animal products, were actively harmful, adding toxins to an already overwhelmed system. The lack of standardized recipes, quality control, and scientific understanding meant that each dose was a gamble. Imagine playing medical roulette with your stomach, where the prize is either a slight reduction in pain or sudden kidney failure. These concoctions highlight the trial and error nature of medieval medicine and the desperate search for anything that might offer a glimmer of hope. They combined genuine folk wisdom with outright superstition and charlatanism. Herbal concoctions and treacle proved that sometimes. The deadliest cures are those that turn your internal organs into a chaotic chemistry experiment, leaving your survival up to chance and the questionable judgment of whoever was brewing the latest batch. Basically, it was a medieval smoothie, and the recipe usually included whatever weird stuff we found, plus prayer. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.